So hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our Cultural Heritage Archaeology and Planning Symposium. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kayla Jonas-Galvin, and I am the Heritage Operations Manager here at ARA. We're going to get started. I think a few people are just joining us now, but we wanted to keep on time so that we can make sure that everyone, all of our speakers have enough time to talk and to answer questions today. So before we get started, we acknowledge and remind ourselves that we are hosting this event from the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We remember that before Confederation, many peoples lived on this land and shared it, including the Neutral Confederacy and a host of other Indigenous peoples, some known and some whose presence is attested only by the archaeological record. We acknowledge the trauma of the colonial experience that followed the arrival of settlers to these lands and the burden which that trauma imposes on us as heritage professionals to decolonize our profession. As you know, we are 100% virtual this year, and it seems like we haven't had any technical difficulties, but if we do ask that you be patient with us as we try and navigate this. If you have any questions for the speakers and panelists, we ask that you put them in the Q&A section, which is shown by the white arrow. That will mean that it goes to the speakers and panelists. If you do want to chat amongst yourselves, you can use the chat function. We ask the Q&A go in the Q&A section so that we can filter through it more easily. You can also use the chat or Q&A function if you do have any technical difficulties. And you can also email Stephanie McLeod at ARA if you have any questions that can't be answered through either of those means. I'm very happy to be hosting day 2. Day 2 is going to focus on some tangible examples of how CHLs are being identified and managed and communicated. For those of you that know me, I'm very type A, so providing the introduction to a day of practical solutions is very on brand for me. I know I'm typically talking about those buildings that you saw in the intro slide, but I wanted to continue on some themes that were brought up yesterday. So as Paul and Gary talked about yesterday, our entire landscape has been managed to some degree. So when we're doing heritage assessments, we wanted to know how do we learn about these Indigenous histories and the importance of landscapes to these communities. So I wanted to share 2 kind of tangible examples of how ARA has gone through that process. ARA was retained to complete work within the Strasburg Creek watershed. Based on our past work there and a search of the Ontario Archaeological Sites database, was revealed that there are 87 Indigenous archaeological sites within the study area. As such, ARA's work plan included reaching out to Indigenous communities to determine if the study area or a portion of the study area could be considered a CHL with an Indigenous component. In order to better understand the ties of the Indigenous peoples to the area and to assist with defining the cultural heritage values as well as the boundaries of this CHL, ARA reached out to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council, and the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council. Based on the consultation as well as historic research, it was determined that the Strasburg Creek watershed was an evolved landscape consisting of a number of temporal layers overlain on the natural landscape. The values that were identified included that the watershed contains a number of known archaeological sites, including a cluster of pre-contact, late woodland, First Nations, and agricultural village sites. There's the potential for additional archaeological sites within the study area, as well as the possibility to learn more about the use of the pre-contact landscape from examining the known sites. The Indigenous and early Euro-Canadian settlement of the area appears to be tied directly to the use of Strasburg Creek, as well as the larger watershed, as a natural resource. The second project I wanted to highlight was a heritage impact assessment that ARA undertook for the Ojibways of the Pic River First Nation to examine the impacts of a construction of a hydroelectric facility at High Falls. The High Falls site has a documented history as a portage route used during the fur trade. It was an obstacle along this important route, but it was also a landmark. A geographer writing in 1871 for the Geographical Survey of Canada indicates that Sand Hill Falls, which is also known as High Falls, pictured here, was the third portage route of the Pic River, going upstream from the Pic Post. It was also an important site during the logging era as a former drive camp for loggers. This information was documented in written history, but it was augmented by an interview ARA took with a log driver who worked in the area during the 1960s. He provided a video of the Pic River at High Falls from his time working there. The elders of the Ojibwe of the Pic River First Nation were consulted regarding their perspective of the significance of the site. When they were consulted, there was 5 major themes that emerged from this conversation. They revealed that the High Falls site was used as part of their traditional territory, and traditional activities such as hunting, trapping, and fishing happened here. They did not know of any sacred use of the site, but expressed interest in knowing more about its use, perhaps through spiritual specialists. They expressed enthusiasm for the prospects of accessibility due to the new infrastructure for the site and how this access could lead to the site taking on new significance. The value of the High Falls CHL was defined by its association with several groups who use the site for economic reasons. Pic River and High Falls was and is used by the First Nations groups as part of their traditional territory. During the use of Pic River by the Hudson's Bay Company and fur traders, High Falls was an important link along the fur trade route. High Falls was also an important site during the logging area as a former drive camp for loggers. As these 2 examples illustrate, consultation with communities was key to identifying the presence of CHLs as well as their heritage value. This type of consultation is becoming part of ARA's standards practice, an important part of land use planning in Ontario. As stated by the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, the 2020 PPS, or Provincial Policy Statement, update provides stronger language that reinforces the duty to consult and the type of relationship that planning in Ontario shall create with Indigenous peoples. In particular, I would point out the change to Policy 2.6.5 that requires engagement with Indigenous communities. I think this answers some of the questions that were raised to the speakers yesterday, as well as in the chat function. This is what our schedule today looks like. It's very similar to yesterday. We have 2 sessions with a break in between. As we mentioned yesterday, we're all in different locations with different internet providers and all kinds of distractions like kids and dogs. So we ask that everyone give the speakers and our tech people here some grace and bear with us through any technical difficulties. Our first speaker will directly address how to showcase this Indigenous cultural identity on the land across Ontario through recognizable Indigenous markers on significant cultural historic sites and venues. In keeping with ARA's mandate to encourage initiatives rooted in social justice, we are using the symposium as an opportunity to encourage support for local charities. Every year, ARA selects a worthy initiative, usually Indigenous focused, to support using the donations from CHAP attendees. As Paul mentioned yesterday, we never use these contributions to finance the event itself. This symposium is for us a chance to connect with everyone. We love seeing everyone in person at the RBG, but we're very excited that we're still able to connect in these uncertain times. As Paul mentioned yesterday, and as you've seen in the invitation, our charity is the Moccasin Identifier project this year. And we want to thank all attendees for your generosity. We also wanted to thank our speakers, many of them who donated their honorariums to the cause. As our first speaker this morning, we welcome Elder Carolyn King. Carolyn is the former chief and member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and recently received the Order of Canada for her expertise in community development, her advocacy of Indigenous-led initiatives, and her efforts to improve Canada's understanding of First Nations. We are very proud and excited to welcome Carolyn to tell us more about her project. Carolyn, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, there's a joint presentation here. So greetings to everyone. Honey, Dijnakas, Carolyn King, Ejabayan, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And that I thank everyone for the opportunity to present our project today, and that hopefully we'll be what do you call it, moving forward. So for today, I'm part of a team. Our project is called the Moccasin Identifier team, and that unfortunately I've had a couple situations in my life recently. My husband died just 3 weeks ago tomorrow, and then I had, in the midst of all this, I had cataract eye surgery. So my short distance, the close reading is not working all that well. And so lately I've been having to use a magnifying glass to read things that I need to read. So I've been pretty quiet lately, amazingly. And my colleague here, Susan Robinson, who's a part of a big part of our team, has agreed to work with the presentation, and she put together a revamped one that we've done before, and it's been we were going over it, and I think we got it all down and let everybody know about where we come from with the project and where we are today. So you can see Susan there, and she's going to run the slide presentation. Susan, if you want to make any comments.
I'm good. Thanks so much for having us here today.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you can see that on our first slide here that the Moccasin Identifier, and you see it up behind me. And if you see above my head, I have a Moccasin Identifier in place of the clock. Usually that's the clock, but that little project is about 2 feet, and it's a steel Moccasin Identifier designed for me to put up outside in a little plot there. So my granddaughter bought it for me for Christmas. So that's why I have this huge moccasin that I sometimes carry around. So anyway, I will get started. I can chat all day, but anyway, we can start it. So in partnership with the Mississaugas of the Credit, we are presenting this. Just a quick overview of the presentation. You'll see as we zip through this, UNESCO definition of cultural heritage landscapes. We're taking it from the big picture down to the local picture. Decolonizing heritage planning in Canada, Indigenous cultural heritage research recommendations, the beginning of the Moccasin Identifier, vision, mission, goals, process, and programs, accomplishments, site installation, and then the ask, joining us to keep moving this forward. UNESCO World Heritage Landscapes. Cultural heritage landscapes are combined works of nature and humankind that express a long and intimate relationship between peoples and their natural environment. I keep saying, it's all about the land. Pimachio Win Aki, the land that gives life, is a landscape of rivers, lakes, wetlands, and boreal forests. It forms part of the ancestral home of the Anishinaabe. decolonizing cultural heritage landscapes in Canada. What we've learned is that the settler community is all about built history and not about culture, and sometimes doesn't even include environment. The cultural narrative of settler history predominates. The Western traditions and approaches to heritage conservation are a different paradigm, a different story, a snapshot. I would answer questions there. Take chat up. It's gone over. Just sorry, I just got to take this out. Western heritage planning is tangible and material focused, buildings, lands, streetscapes, and structures. The Indigenous Cultural Heritage, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, intangible cultural heritage. Indigenous cultural heritage is intangible. And we talk about our oral stories, our relationship to the land, the belief that all things are living and all things have a spirit. It is underrepresented through colonial narratives, associative and place-based knowledge, its inseparable relationship with the land. It is iterative and action-orientated. Traditional knowledge, Indigenous cultural heritage, place-based knowledge that is a direct personification of Indigenous cultural worldviews on the landscape and tradition. And we use the, you'll see the First Nations call our North America Turtle Island, and that it very much, if you look at it in the broader perspective, it very much looks like the turtle and sort of the beginning of life. Although all cultures and communities have a specific relationship, physical and associative, with its environment, which is ingrained in its culture, its language, and its livelihood, and its sense of being, and its identity, which is inseparable from its relationship with land, quoted from UNESCO 2010.
And if I could just jump in here,
Yep.
Carolyn, to say that traditional ecological knowledge is an example of intangible Indigenous cultural heritage that reinforces all these things that you've quoted from UNESCO in terms of inseparable relationship to the land and associative place-based knowledge.
Yes, thank you. So just into the Moccasin Identifier, and you often hear, if those who have heard me speak, say about, I want to change the world, our world, and that it's time that we be recognized in this country as the Indigenous people of the land, and that we have a place even as part of today's. I say we were there and we're still here. So when you want to change the world, it takes a lot of people. And this is a shot of one of our camps where the children are stenciling the Moccasin Identifier on the street. They learn in the educational project, they get lessons about treaties, the Indigenous people, depending on the grade and what curriculum they're using, that they, what level of curriculum, they get to learn about us. And that's being implemented through the schools system as we talk. If we as First Nations people don't get a marker on the ground today, we will be lost forever. In my time of working as an official employee of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and doing community development and land use development for our nation, and then doing outreach in the various other jobs, we're always, not just me, we're always in the mode to educate the people we work with about who we are, where we are, why we are, and why we do the things the way we do them. And that's always, something that kind of have to start the whole meeting, or, when we first meet people, to teach them about us. And that became sort of my moniker. I was always telling people who we are. And I realize as they continue to work, how little information is out there that talks about us from our voices. And that it has become my drive to change that world, and we have a plan to work to do that through the Moccasin Identifier. And we're just one initiative, but we started out, the Mississaugas of the Credit host a historical gathering. I call it the 3-day gathering. We started it specifically for that. Margaret Salt, who's the coordinator or the director in Lands Research and Membership, and that it was this idea that we gather up our history and our story from what has been written about us and what we see it as, and that the next generation won't have to do it. And that we started out the Moccasin Identifier as a digital dot, I call it, working with the University of Waterloo and Fred McGarry and his team to do research on significant sites, and that we would have a dot on the map, just like say you use the Google Maps or you use Waze, whatever way that, that when there are significant sites, you can kind of tap on it if you're traveling and go check out what's over there. And they're now marked on the maps. Well, that's how we started out. But at our 3-day historical gathering, and we were presenting about the Catherine Sutton homestead, and that it was up by Collingwood, kind of on the west side of Collingwood. I've been to the site, so I know what's there. We presented there with we were presenting about it and how important Catherine Sutton was to the history and her fight to get Indigenous rights recognized, and that we were really looking to profile her. Professor Donald Smith, he's now retired. He presented, has written a lot of story about Catherine Sutton. And she is the first woman. She was the Mississaugas, and people don't know her story, that she married out, as we call it, to a non-native, and that she was taken off the ban list or the member, and then she moved up to Collingwood and they started a farm there, and she was the owner of the property, and that so when she, as an Indigenous person, so when she wanted to buy the land, therefore she couldn't be recognized because she wasn't, back then we weren't people. And she fought to get recognized as that. And she went pregnant on a ship all the way to England to meet with the Queen, and was fortunate to get the Queen's audience with the Queen to have her recognized. So she is really a leader in our rights for Indigenous leaders and women specifically. So when just that particular site, so I said I've been there. It's a field. It has remnant farm because they had a farm there, but otherwise there's no signage, no story about her. And that when the archaeology resources are removed from this site, how will they ever know that your people were here? And so with a marker system, it was asked, what if what will happen if I go there? Will I see anything? And I said, no, you won't. It's been plowed up, dug over, built over. And that and it was suggested that we have a marker system. My friend Jane Beecroft and numerous other my historical friends, and they said, well, maybe we should have a placking system, a marker system. And we said, okay, well, let's talk about it. And that they suggested that we develop a symbol. And so then they suggested the eagle feather. And I said, no, that's too sacred to us. And they suggested the dotems, our clan system, the deer, the bear, the wolf, whatever our particular clan system is. And then I said, no, that's also too sacred to us. And besides that, it would just make us mad if everybody walked over those important things to us and didn't know about it. And I said, would just make us angry again. So, and they said, well, come up with something that we can use, and we'll present it to our people, which was the Ontario Heritage Trust at that time. And so I went back to my office at New Credit and cleaned off the whiteboard, and I wrote, what will identify us and connect us to the land? And I say, it shouldn't have taken me 3 days, but on the third day, I said, it's our footwear. And our next step was to go investigate our footwear with the Bata shoe. From there, it was born, and it has evolved to be a stenciling project on paper on the sidewalk, on buildings, wherever we can take it and start to change the world. The Moccasin Identifier is it's a tool to understand the truth. It's educational content to increase knowledge and awareness of Indigenous history, worldviews in schools and public places, to reimagine heritage planning through the Moccasin Identifier. It's education that got us into this mess, and it's education that will get us out. This is a quote from Marie St. Clair in 2015. You can see the stencils that you're having there. See there, you'll see these all are we have a wonderful relationship with partnership with the Batashu. They have an amazing collection of Indigenous collection. And I've been fortunate to be in the vaults a few times. It's amazing. For those who know me, I tell people that there's few things in this world that stop me from talking and takes my breath away. Well, the Batashu Museum collections is one of them. I walked into that room 2 stories down, and you're just taken back by it. And that it was that it's, you got to remember, this is leather. It's been tanned, and that it's somebody's footwear. And the Batashu collection encompasses the circumpolar and all of North America. So they have a really broad collection, and it's just amazing place to be. If you ever get an opportunity to go there or take your groups there, I recommend that. They do different presentations of the archaeology of Indigenous at different times over the year, and that it's a beautiful one. The one that started with us when I started was beauty, pride, and identity, and I found that the moccasin work really is women's work, and that they do a lot of the work from the tanning up to the decorating and then supplying it to their people. So grounding the connection to land treaty knowledge through moccasins. That's our goal. And it's a simple, non-threatening, easy to do. And we've been fortunate that the concept has been taken up by hundreds and hundreds of people. We've talked to numerous groups about it, and it's growing. It will keep on with and we're keeping on. You can see, I might know, the symbol you see behind me is what we call the Anishinaabe one, and with the center seam. And center seam, Ojibwe, the Ojibwe word Ojibwe means gathered up puckered seam. And the Ojibwe Anishinaabe can be considered, like, if you could look down at our footwear and say, that's an Ojibwe. Gathered, puckered seam, gathered up. And so that's how our process of starting this, and that we have different ones. You'll see that we are trying to do all of Ontario and eventually all of Canada. And you'll see this one here, the moccasin, people are taking it up and stenciling themselves, children right up to all ages, I'll say. This is the Cree moccasin with that's been done in two and 3 colors, and people are getting very good at making them stenciling on the ground using 2 different types of paint. I think this one is at the Toronto Island project that we were doing. So the goal is to get across Canada, but we are focusing, our projects today have been focusing on our treaty lands, and we've been funded by the Green Belt, so those things line up. You'll see one on that. The mission, to advance treaty and Indigenous awareness through education, public awareness, and a network of knowledge for the benefit of truth and reconciliation. You can see these are some of the classwork work we done, and the school had to plaster the whole floor with them because it was not good outside. So we have to be inside, and so they used newspaper to cover the whole floor. And in one day, we did 700 kids. It was an amazing accomplishment. Our goal is to facilitate a cultural shift in Canada by sharing treaty history with children through the distribution of an accessible educational kit. And we have a box that a folder that has been redeveloped to we get people to order them, and they get the 4 stencils, some history stuff, and develop the curriculum. We develop a coordinated branding program to mark significant Indigenous sites for the benefit of the public awareness. We form partnerships with communities, organizations to build understanding, engagement, and support. We create a network of knowledge on treaties to restore harmony between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And for I've started out on doing the talks, and go back just to say that it was called Indian 101 because I was always having to explain why the reserve lands, as a business development person, why the reserve lands were different and how we did business and how people could work with us. So it's been a long, long time that I've been talking to different people, and it has been I've been fortunate and privileged to be able to do that and advocate on behalf of our people. So we continue to do that and use tools like what has been developed here to reach an even broader audience. In our project, I talked about just doing the treaty lands, but in order to, the schools are in all different areas, and that our people just in Ontario, and we picked the 4 that we've done here because it addresses linguistically the groups in Ontario, the Cree in the north, the Anishinaabe throughout Ontario, Huron-Wendat's mid, and then the Seneca, New York State, into southwestern Ontario through Niagara. And we looked at the historical context about why people say, why just the Seneca, when there are more Iroquois, like the Six Nations and all the different groups there, that the Seneca were the ones that pushed into southern Ontario to take up the land and get access to the fur trading, plentiful fur in the southern Ontario. So those are our 4 key areas, key groups that we target. And as we move forward, it will be expanded just because people will want to have their own versions of it. But this is what's in the educational kit and what people can use and safely use, and that it represents all Ontario. So people will in Toronto will decide to do the Cree because they think it's, they like that style better. And that's fine, as long as the idea is that we're marking, we're using something and marking the land and creating an interest in what that mark means. Our research, I mentioned the Batachou Museum collection, special access to the Moccasin collection to view and design moccasin stencils. They have a wonderful selection. I've been to the Canadian Museum of History as well, sat with their collections, visited and toured there a couple of times. And then I asked for access to the collections and was given full access with handlers to look at everything they got. And they give us, they're on site to provide all the background information on this. I've been to the Calgary Glenbow Museum, wonderful, wonderful collection of stuff. BC for the, in Victoria at the university and the museums there. On my vacations, I go, this is what I go do, tour different places like that and get information, make contacts. And that's so what we did for the Moccasin Identifier with the Batachou is that we engaged Philip Cote, who's an artist in Toronto. And you see his website there. And he's been doing all the big murals in Toronto. And he has his staff. The idea was to take the real moccasin, and Philip joined us in the visits to the Batachou, and then he drew them. So the pictures you see are based on real moccasins that are in the collection at the Batachou. And so we have full access to all of their collection, their curated material, and that, and we continue to have a strong relationship with them. You see all those are very, very much in there, the collection there. So go back one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're done there. These are all real moccasins that they've collected. And if you didn't know about the late Sonia Bata, she, I'm told from the workers there, Elizabeth Samohack, senior curator there, has been a key supporter of us, and we're so proud to have her as part of our group. So we took the drawings, took the real picture of that, did the drawings, and then evolved it into the stencils. So we always have to acknowledge Philip and all the work that he's done for us. And if you get to visit the Battle Shoe, by all means, make that trip. It's well worth it. It's these shoes of the world. I might mention too that in the collections, 2 stories down, there are 2 big vaults. One is the Indigenous collection, and the other vault, same size, is the rest of the world. And you understand the emphasis that Sonia Bada put on the Indigenous collection. And it is that she purchased almost all of that collection herself. She'd go to the people, and they said that she never dickered with it, never asked them to lower the price. If the price was, $200 or $2,000, she paid it. And that's so she has quite the reputation for being fair with the getting the collection and putting it in place. Okay. The Moccasin Identifier program, it became, I'm not sure we're calling it we started with a project, now call it a program, and maybe it's an initiative as it grows to be part of the whole country. It became the Education Identifier, Moccasin Identifier Education Leader, and teaches treaties using the Moccasin Identifier Educational Kit. Moccasin Identifier Experience Opportunities. Here we're at the Fort York, presenting during June, during Indigenous Education Week there, and that having the people stencil, and we did some small stencils with children over on the sidewalks and stuff. And sometimes it takes a lot to get permission from the municipalities or the city or the structure that you can paint on their property. I'm over in my other side, I'm known as a graffiti artist because I painted on the public streets in Toronto. And I had a little I got a talking to by the city of Toronto public works people, because we had me and 3 students that I had working with us. We went painted the sidewalk from Fleet into Fort York, and they give us a little talking to about painting on the public street. And so that night, it was when we were getting ready for the Pan Am Games. I talked to the mayor, current mayor, John Corey, and I showed him what we were doing and how we painted the moccasins on the sidewalk. And he said, that's great, Carolyn. And I said, well, some of you people didn't think so. They give me a talking to today. So we didn't finish painting up to Bathurst Street to make a path that would go into the event. And he said, oh, he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his business card. And he said, if you can paint anywhere you want in my city. And he goes, if anybody gives you trouble, you tell them to call me. So I got it from the top that I can paint that city. And the other thing that we did in the city of Toronto and other municipalities we continue to work with, that the Moccasin Identifier is an opportunity for municipalities to include Indigenous visualizations, and that in their official plan, and this is how deep the work has to go, into the official plan of a municipality, to say that they're going to acknowledge the Indigenous people of their area, of the land, and that the Moccasin Identifier is identified in their official plan as the kind of project that they could use to assist in recognition for Indigenous people. Back then it was called the Emerging Moccasin Identifier. And that's so. It takes a lot. It's going to take a lot to get through the whole system and across the country, and hopefully even North America, because I have maps of all the moccasins in the different in the United States as well. But we're sticking to what we're doing right now to get through that. So there's things that there's events happening. Participate in Moccasin Identifier events as part of June Indigenous Month, June 21st Day, Orange Shirt Day, which is September 30th. There's Treaty Recognition Week, which is an act put out by the provincial government for the first week in November. And it's all about recognition of treaties. And then there's other more friendly things, Rocky Mocks, where you wear your moccasins to work that day. Yeah, I wear mine just about every day, but the that's part of our whole plan is to, make it easy for people to be part of what we're doing. So you can install Moccasin Identifier in your community, public spaces, work environment. Moccasin Identifiers will participate. If anybody wants us to come, we'll come. We'll come and do a little presentation, have you stencil, all ages, and we'll participate in ribbon cutting ceremonies if you're going to put it up there. And next one, I want to tell a little story about it. We did a presentation for shared. I'm on my other life. I have shared path, which is again is about advocating and creating an understanding about First Nations and the municipality. Shared path is about bridging the relationship in Ontario with the municipalities and First Nations. So that's another project, and it's the same as this, educating and making aware about the Indigenous population. Here, the two maps, the connection to the land, from the different regions, planning to treaties to building understanding. So here you see on the one side with the color, purple and blue and orange, those are the different treaties that were done by the Mississaugas of the Credit. Treaty 3, where the Mississauga Reserve sits right now, is in what we call Treaty 3, or Between the Lakes Treaty, and a huge cessation of land that give the British government of the day access to start settlement in the area that they wanted to come into. And we've been supported by the Green Belt and the preservation of green space in this, as it's become the most built up area. And you can see that it matches almost directly with our treaty map. So it's a good linkage, and we're looking to mark sites inside of the green belt and on our treaty lands and beyond as it goes. Just to say, talk about what we've accomplished in the 10 years. The month of February 2001 would have been our 10th year, because that discussion about, we need a marker on the land, and when it was created was February 2011. So we've come a long way from the digital dot to educational program that I truly believe it's going to change the world. Brand identified, website launched, attended over 100 events, presentations to thousands of school children. Like in that one of the two school dates that we had in Mississauga, Lindsay and I were there. Lindsay Hill, one of our key workers in our project, did almost 1,000 kids in those 2 days. So not including all the other ones that we've done. So we've done a lot of schools basically it's been by invitation of the teacher who wants to include us in their work. Archaeological sites collected for all the green belt for a coordinated marker installation system. And that's where we're at today. We're going to move into identifying those key areas and working with the municipality of where we can start to put more permanent markers, and then they can do programming around it. Conservation areas are key in our project, because most of our life, our First Nations are along the waterway. And so I think it's important to be near those areas. We did a pilot evaluation of educational kit conducted. We had the teachers look at it. Will it fit? Will it work? They proposed changes to it, and so we've addressed those. We revised that whole educational content with a teachers working group. I had no idea how hard it was to build curriculum for each of the grades. And I said, I'm going to be a teacher after I'm done all this. We've done a lot of work to partner with people who are agreeable, want to, and are willing to carry their projects forward. We're partnering currently with the Indigenous Tourism Ontario, who it's like moving it from just the educational and our idea to mark or get our name down on the ground through this to. They would like to see it as a tourism product where you walk into an Indigenous vendor, and our little Moccasin Identifier kit is on the shelf, and anybody can buy it and take it and start to mark their lands and their own property. So that's changing the world. That's what I believe. The Eco Schools Canada, we've been working with them to create a linking it to the environment, a project with them that's ongoing. Toronto Public Library and many more. They're all looking to see how they can include it in their programming in their community for all age. It comes down to all ages. This is a school there. Yeah, one of the schools where they're marking it. And so you can see this is our big profile one. And when I was at the when I worked in duty to consult at the First Nation between 210 and 214, the Ontario government, Liberal government of the day, they looked to do something Indigenous. They were revamping Ontario Place, and as we know today, it's getting revamped again. You see, this is the entrance to the Ontario Place Trillium Park, and then the William G. Davis Trail. And you see that they took those symbols that we had and worked closely with me as the lead and the First Nation Council. And we met with the community. We presented at the historical gathering. We had other meetings where people said, is this a good idea? And as we kept going, it evolved to be the lead in, they call it the entrance to the William G. Davis Trail. So it's amazing. It's pretty powerful when you go there. There's lots of signage as you walk up to it. And then the inside the trail, I felt that it was a very inclusive project and that they included us in all of the levels. And you have to work really hard and be able to respond and be with them when they're looking at, maybe this isn't going to work for what they think. And so it took a lot of work and a lot of time to be there and to get through that. So we have the site us recognized as part of our treaty lands, the Toronto Purchase, which is treaty number 13. And then into that it's natural. It's all based on Carolinian plants. There's a what you call a fire pit there where we can go and do a fire, even a sacred ceremony, and but all people can use that fire pit. It's not where you have to have a little barbecue to start a fire, have a fire in Toronto and have a bunch of wieners sitting beside you so that you're not breaking the law of open flame. It's happening. Toronto's happening. It's starting to make changes, and other municipalities are putting fire pits in place for people to use and gather. This is at Centennial College. I was one of their council members for many years. I just left there, and that they took up the cause. And on that pathway, the Moccasin Identifier is engraved into the concrete. Then they have signage, and we're working on more things as we go through. And that's with all the groups, not just the Mississaugas. And they've done some Indigenous design there into their new system, and they have a new building that's going to include us too. This here is Nathan Tidrich, a good friend and supporter. This is a student who started an educational program inside his school, and that it is for during a day. And we haven't been able to do it because of the just timing and then COVID and things like that, where on say June 21st, they would, on the blank spot at the top, they would use chalk or paint, and they'll stencil it on there, and it has recognition about what the Moccasin Identifier is. So we're still working with them. And this is a young student, age 16, and that this is up at Fort York, spraying on the ground there. People of all ages just going in there and spraying. Then this is at Gibson. I think that's Gibson House, where part of museum we did the during the month of June, Indigenous month, attended almost every museum to do a little presentation and stenciling on the sidewalk. So worked out great. Here is one of our big events. We've been fortunate to be included in the CNE and have a booth there. And so through our cultural events person, Caitlin LaForme, and the council, she has a committee, major events committee, where it's bigger events. This is at the booth at the CNE, and that we started it. And you say, how did we get all those on the wall? Well, it started out with one little girl who come through, say at 10 o'clock when the events open, and she wanted to stencil, so we stenciled. And then I said, well, you can leave it here or take it home. And she goes, I want to take it home and hang it on my wall. And her mother said, no, we're not going to carry that around all day because it's wet, right? And I said, well, you know what you can do? You leave it here. I'll pin it on the wall right here. And that when you come back, you can take it home. It'll be all dry and ready for you to carry. And so that started it. Then the next person started. That week, we ended up doing over 800 stencils and put on the wall. That's not all of them. We had to keep adjusting it because we took up the whole wall, and people took some home. And you see that they put, Caitlin got some big stencils, decals to put on the floor. It was a great 18 days or 17 days of the CNE, the effort. And this is another day at the Fort York, where we're presenting and talking about the Moccasin Identifier. That's Kim Wheatley, good friend and cultural heritage advocate as well, and trainer, educator. And so this here's other stencils. You see, everybody will want to do something different. At first, we started out with the 4 colors, but then you can't find them all, and it's got to be non-toxic. And so we use temper paint, chalk paint, and chalk, all different versions for the kids to use, because it has to have to be fair. Only some projects will do permanent if there's adults and they got full permission, because you've already been having to deal with stenciling it on public property, and it's staying there forever. Learn about, in ending here, learn about the truth through treaties. You can go to the website and our website, First Nations, you just punch in First Nations or treaties in Canada, and you will see that this country has treaties across almost every aspect of the land. Participate in Indigenous events, support the Moccasin Identifier public installations, buy a kit, teach treaties in your place of work or your community through graffiti art. And that we have, a lady sent us what she did. She took up the cause on her street and got her children over the last summer to go down the street and ask people if they would allow her children to stencil the moccasins on their sidewalk. It was great. And so my thing is that pass the educational school program. So if I was to give you a stencil, then what you would do is go paint it on your step or your sidewalk. And then when somebody asks about it, you get to tell them about the history of it and why, this particular symbol, any one of the 4, what it is, and that it represents the Indigenous people. So we're asking you to join us and change the world. It'll be great. Here's our contact information. We have a project that's supported by the Green Belt. It's called the Moccasin Identifier now. We had to take the project off of it because it was conflicting with another person's project. So we're at the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The website is moccasinidentifier.com. The address for the First Nation is there, and that you can get connected with us and see how we can help change the world. Chimigwech, thank you very much for ARA for including us, and that in the future cultural landscape, I envision that we're going to see moccasin identifiers across this area, locally and across the country, and will change our future. And that our story, our visualization, our artwork, our symbols will be included in that future cultural heritage presentation. Chimigwech.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn and Susan. Carolyn, I'm always in awe of your passion and your energy every time I hear you speak. You just make me want to get out and do it right now.
Good, good.
So there are a few questions, but I might just ask you to type them in the answer box in the Q&A,
Okay.
so that we can move into our break and
Yep.
keep our time. So we are moving into our 10-minute break now, and there's again no need to sign off. We're going to mute ourselves and get our cameras ready to move into our next session, and we'll meet you back here in 10 minutes for that next session. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're back from the break, and we're going to get started in today's second session. So today's second session is going to be a panel discussion, and it will feature 3 heritage planners from municipalities in Ontario. We're going to have Paula, the heritage planner from the city of Mississauga, Victoria, the heritage planner at the city of Kitchener, and Michelle, the senior policy planner at the city of Waterloo. The panel is going to be moderated by Amy, who joined ARA as the Heritage Project Manager in the fall of 2020. So I'm going to hand it over to them, and hopefully our tech transfer works well.
Thank you, Kayla. So we're going to start with Michelle, who's going to present to us on the work that they are doing in Waterloo. And Michelle, you can take it away.
All right, thanks, Amy. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. Just take me a few seconds here. All right, Amy, can you just give me a thumbs up or a yes if you could?
You are good to go. We can see it wonderfully.
All right, thanks. So thank you, Amy and Kayla and everyone for inviting me to participate in this. It's a great topic, and I'm excited to have a conversation with the other panelists. I'm going to talk today about Waterloo's approach to mapping and identifying cultural heritage landscapes. And just as a brief introduction, I'm a senior policy planner at the City of Waterloo. I've been involved in Waterloo's heritage planning sort of program, I guess you could call it, since 2013. And as part of that, we undertook a fairly large citywide cultural heritage landscape study. So before I start, I think it's helpful to understand the planning framework that the City of Waterloo operates within. We are a 2-tiered system. So we are a local municipality that operates within the region of Waterloo. And the region of Waterloo sets out a number of fairly broad policies in their official plan, but they also set out some helpful guideline documents, one of which was a guideline document for identifying significant cultural heritage landscapes. And that guiding document was used by the City of Waterloo to implement a identification and planning process for cultural heritage landscapes. So the guiding document set out the identification and planning process in 3 phases. The first was inventorying what we had. So that involved identifying, evaluating, and mapping significant cultural heritage landscapes. The next phase is a technical study phase where each cultural heritage landscape is studied in detail to understand what the heritage values and specific features are. And then the third phase would be a plan. So identifying any policies, actions, incentives, anything that could help conserve the cultural heritage landscape. The process for identifying cultural heritage landscapes was, as you can see, and I don't expect you to be able to read the text, but you can see there were a lot of criteria that were set out in the region's guiding document for identifying significance. These were actually directly drawn from provincial policy. So the provincial policy statement definition for cultural heritage landscapes has a number of key words in them, and the region actually quite closely mirrored that definition in their development of these criteria, in addition to the regulations under the Ontario Heritage Act, which set out criteria for identifying significant cultural heritage resources. So collectively, as you can see, there's a lot of criteria that go into considering whether something is significant. And I think it would be fair to say there is also a level of I don't want to say a subjectiveness, but a level of interpretation required to determine what is the minimum bar for significance, and that what is the minimum bar that our community and our council is comfortable with in terms of setting out what's significant. So we carried out this inventory of our cultural heritage landscapes and brought a report to council in 2019 that identified a number of landscapes. So that's where we're at right now. We've finished the inventory. We have not undertaken any significant technical studies or CHL plans. The inventory itself contained 27 significant cultural heritage landscapes, and these ranged from fairly small parks to large neighborhoods to formal industrial areas, large farmsteads that were sort of remnant in the landscape, churches and graveyards. And these landscapes all were deemed significant because they met the criteria. And I think, if you were to sum it up in a phrase, you would say that these had value to the community. They had significant or sufficient integrity that you could see what the original land use or form was when it was originally created. And it had significant community value. I might have said that one already. It also had significant heritage value. So those were sort of the defining features of these significant landscapes. You can imagine that undertaking technical studies for 27 landscapes all at once is a challenge. So what we did next was to prioritize our actions, to identify which landscapes were those that were most at threat and most valued by the community. And we identified about 5 or 6 of those to initiate further work. We also considered a fairly broad range of approaches for conserving these landscapes. So while I think it's fair to say that a more traditional approach would be to conserve landscapes using the Ontario Heritage Act by listing all the landscapes on the Municipal Heritage Register and then starting to chip away at designations, we also recognize that some of the landscapes we identified were sufficiently conserved. Some of them were already designated. Some of them, the heritage features or values that were of interest may not have been well protected through a designation because perhaps they were continuing to evolve, and that is a very challenging thing to conserve in situ or in some kind of permanent form. So we identified a pretty big range of approaches that we could take on, ranging from the lesser intervention type approaches like encouraging people to recognize and celebrate the heritage values of those landscapes, to incentivizing actions that might be taken either individually and privately or community-wide to protect those values, to ensuring that our plans and guiding documents are actually supportive of conservation of those landscapes, as opposed to perhaps providing conflicting direction as to the future evolution of those landscapes. And then last of all, of course, we recognize that conservation was also through the traditional means under the Ontario Heritage Act was also an appropriate response for a number of the landscapes. So our next steps are to take the opportunity. We're updating our official plan at the city at the moment. And so we're going to take this opportunity to add a new schedule to that plan, which is basically just a map showing all the significant cultural heritage landscapes, and then to develop wraparound policies for those landscapes that will enable us to ask for heritage impact assessments under certain situations. And that's going to help us manage, at least at a broad level, change and development. But we recognize we still need to do those technical studies to hone in on exactly what those features are that need to be protected, and to develop more strategic approaches for protecting those features. I think the most important or most interesting part of this conversation is really the lessons that we learned at the city in terms of undertaking this study. And I think absolutely at the front end, the most important lesson learned was One, the awareness building requirement to talk about what is a cultural heritage landscape, what does it mean, and how does it relate to other types of heritage resources? Why is it important to conserve these landscapes? Our goal was to make sure that we had significant community buy-in, because we've recognized that with council being really the decision maker for identifying what's significance, conservation is very much impacted by the political process and the pressures from citizens who may or may not be interested in conserving heritage resources. So generating that interest and appreciation in cultural heritage landscapes was an integral part of the study. Also, we did learn a little bit from our friends in other municipalities regarding whether or not to list cultural heritage landscapes and all the individual properties within those landscapes on the municipal heritage register. What we heard or learned from those municipalities was that just taking the thousands of properties that were listed, identified within cultural heritage landscapes and moving them immediately over to the municipal heritage register created a very large burden on staff that was very hard to manage in terms of properly assessing heritage impact assessments and their impact on these landscapes. So we did opt to use the official plan approach to develop a more strategic and stepwise approach to getting these properties listed. We didn't want to list them before we had a framework around what were we asking for, how are we going to manage change, and what was the magnitude of that change that we were interested in before we were going to ask for a heritage impact assessment. We also recognized, and I went over this a little bit in an earlier slide, that there is a range of actions that can be taken for conservation. So that ranges from celebrating all the way up to more stringent approaches. And I think that fit well with the messaging to our community, not all of whom are interested in fairly stringent approaches. So that helped gain a large amount of acceptance. And then last of all, this is an issue that's more recently been raised, is that we are very mindful that the cultural heritage landscape tool is increasingly being used, or there's a desire to use it to prevent development in areas that are not identified as significant cultural heritage landscapes. And so we're being very cautious in the application of these tools and making sure that they aren't used to prevent change and development for things that have limited impact on heritage values. So I'm going to leave it there. I know I'm just slightly over time, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Appreciate that. And we all can appreciate how important that first step of understanding what it is you have in your community and what's valued by the community is a really fundamental foundation to build on. So I'm going to ask Victoria to join now and tell us about all the work they've done in the city of Kitchener. And it builds on kind of this understanding of what you have and kind of what comes next. So Victoria, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. Amy, can you just give me the okay that you can see?
Yep, you are right on there and I can see you. Excellent. Thanks.
Oh, perfect. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Grohn and I am a heritage planner with the city of Kitchener. I'm thrilled to be presenting at this conference this morning to share the work that we are doing with respect to identifying, conserving, and protecting cultural heritage landscapes within the city of Kitchener. My presentation today will largely be focused on how Kitchener is moving forward with implementing identified cultural heritage landscapes within our larger policy and planning frameworks. So the City of Kitchener's Cultural Heritage Landscapes Study was completed in 2014 and approved by City Council in 2015. The purpose of the study was to provide an inventory of the cultural heritage resources of the city of Kitchener in the form of cultural heritage landscapes. So at the time, the city already had a database of primarily built heritage resources, but this cultural heritage landscape inventory contributes an additional dimension of larger scale areas that express both the historical process of development and the physical outcome of that process. So the 2014 Cultural Heritage Landscape Study identified 55 cultural heritage landscapes across the city. Each of the unique cultural heritage landscapes identified fit into various categories, including farmsteads and estates, neighborhoods, cemeteries, transportation corridors, parks and open space, and commercial and industry. So taking stock and identifying the cultural heritage resources that are important to a community is a critical first step in any conservation strategy. So for the identified cultural heritage landscapes, the study provides a description of the landscape, establishes a preliminary boundary of interest, identifies the historical integrity and cultural and community values associated with the landscape, and finally describes the character defining features of the landscape. So the region of Waterloo's three-pronged approach was used to determine cultural heritage landscape significance by evaluating each cultural heritage landscape against cultural heritage value or interest, historical integrity, and community value criteria. While the study does not in itself protect cultural heritage landscapes, it serves as the first of three phases of work involved in establishing appropriate conservation strategies for each identified landscape. So the first phase of Kitchener's cultural heritage landscape conservation strategy, which included the establishment of an inventory of significant cultural heritage landscapes and priority landscapes for further study and analysis, was completed through the 2014 study. Now that we have an inventory of landscapes across the city, we need to determine how to implement these landscapes. The second phase of the cultural heritage landscape conservation strategy is in progress for select landscapes and includes arriving at the cultural heritage policies included in the secondary plans being developed within the city's central neighborhoods. The timing associated with the third and final phase of the city's cultural heritage landscape conservation strategy is in part dependent upon the nature and complexity of the strategies recommended for each cultural heritage landscape. So the cultural heritage landscape study was undertaken to determine how to best creatively conserve the historical integrity and early development pattern of our city while encouraging new growth. The focus of Kitchener's cultural heritage landscape implementation work to date has been on landscapes included within the city's central neighborhoods. This implementation work is occurring as part of a large land use planning process called a neighborhood planning review. The neighborhoods targeted through the neighborhood planning review process are those centrally located around the city's light rail transit station areas. The neighborhood planning review process coordinates the implementation of various city studies that have been completed, including the cultural heritage landscape study. The neighborhood planning review will result in a new secondary plan for each of the planning areas with updated policies, land use, zoning, and urban design guidelines. Neighborhood planning reviews are underway in 6 neighborhoods within the city. Some of these neighborhoods are cultural heritage landscapes in and of themselves, while other neighborhoods are comprised of multiple cultural heritage landscapes. So the cultural heritage landscapes shown and discussed as part of this presentation today include the Cedar Hill neighborhood, which is unique among Kitchener neighborhoods, in part because of the manner in which the urban fabric has adapted to its topography and elevation, and the Gildner Green and Grohn neighborhoods, which are representative of early, stable, inner residential neighborhoods and associated with early industry and subsequent residential development of working class neighborhoods. The cultural heritage landscape implementation process that we have established involves field surveys and analysis of zoning and land use, identification and confirmation of heritage attributes, a review and confirmation of boundary delineations, and conservation recommendations relating to each CHL boundary. This work was done both in-house by city staff with expertise in heritage planning, policy planning, and urban design, as well as with the retention of heritage and planning consultants. For the Cedar Hill Neighborhood Planning Review area, the fieldwork and analysis, identification of attributes, boundary delineation, and conservation recommendations surrounding the Cedar Hill cultural heritage landscape were undertaken in-house by city staff. The same work associated with the Gildner Green and Grohn neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes within our Midtown Neighborhood Planning Review area was undertaken by a consulting team. So the combination of an in-house staff team and consulting team was intended to assist with streamlining the phase 2 implementation work. Oh, here we go. So the fieldwork and analysis involved documenting current conditions. This work involved identifying groupings of properties with similar characteristics, identifying views and vistas, and identifying features specific to the cultural heritage landscape. Preliminary land use designations were also reviewed with the assistance of computer modeling to determine where proposed land use and associated zoning could conflict with cultural heritage landscape conservation interests. This information was considered in assigning land use designations, which balance opportunities for growth and development with heritage conservation objectives. The fieldwork and analysis of the identified cultural heritage landscapes also resulted in the identification of attributes that collectively contribute to making each of the neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes unique. These attributes include common design elements, natural landscape features, and select viewsheds and vistas. Sorry, just need to go to my previous slide. There we go. So further evaluation and analysis of the neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes resulted in recommendations to revise the boundaries of the landscapes. In some instances, these boundary adjustments are recommended to capture and better reflect the areas of the landscape that have conserved the residential historic form and context of the neighborhood, while other boundary adjustments were recommended to allow for a more cohesive and less fractured conservation of the neighborhood. After examining the cultural heritage value and attributes of the neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes, conservation measures were recommended to address cultural heritage interests and objectives. These conservation measures included a combination of Ontario Heritage Act and Planning Act tools, as well as other tools such as management plan, commemoration, and interpretation. Some properties within the neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes have been identified for listing or designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, while others have been identified as significant cultural heritage landscape properties, such as those located at gateways or at terminating vistas. A statement of significance was prepared for each cultural heritage landscape, detailing its physical, historical, and contextual value. The cultural heritage landscape conservation recommendations contributed to the formulation of policies and guidelines within the secondary plans being developed for each neighborhood planning review area. These policies and guidelines include establishing area design guidelines that support cultural heritage conservation objectives, regulating development at specific gateways or to protect identified views, and identifying properties of specific cultural heritage landscape interest where a heritage impact assessment or visual impact assessment may be required to ensure compatible development within the landscape area. Public information meetings were held for each of the neighborhood planning review areas. Specifically, there was information panels on existing cultural heritage resources, identified heritage attributes contributing to the character of the cultural heritage landscapes identified, properties recommended for listing and designation, and proposed refinements to boundaries, and examples and legislative tools to achieve a level of conservation. For one of the neighborhoods, staff solicited feedback through a democracy exercise to gauge public interest regarding specific attributes and had residents rank how important it is that the city establishes some sort of regulation to maintain and enhance these features. So as part of Kitchener's next phase of work, we will implement the conservation recommendations through policy and guideline development within the newly developed secondary plans for the central neighborhoods. We will also prioritize other cultural heritage landscapes in the city for further review and analysis. Some of this work will occur through other additional neighborhood planning review processes. The City of Kitchener's cultural heritage landscape implementation process to date has involved a holistic approach to looking at neighborhood cultural heritage landscapes. Through the identification of heritage interests while simultaneously reviewing and analyzing land use and zoning, this creates a balance for both planning and heritage objectives. Heritage matters can be addressed upfront and help inform land use planning decisions. As the City of Kitchener continues to grow and face development pressures, cultural heritage landscape policy and guidelines will guide growth in a way that protects and enhances the character that makes each neighborhood special. The cultural heritage landscape implementation work has also shown that a combination of tools can be used to achieve conservation efforts and address overlapping interests, such as heritage character and urban design objectives. Lastly, each cultural heritage landscape is unique and should be evaluated and addressed based on its own merits. Measures used to conserve one landscape may not be appropriate or effective for another landscape. So the City of Kitchener's cultural heritage landscape implementation work strives to be a proactive approach to balance competing interests of heritage conservation and development. The review of cultural heritage landscapes to date by the city has been prioritized because of the growth pressures directly related to the LRT. So we're excited to continue this work, and I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Very interesting. And I think everyone who's had to work with cultural heritage landscapes understands that it's not only a complexity of understanding what you're working with, but understanding how the best way to conserve that and to make sure that the community's values that they associate with that space is conserved. So I see Paula's getting herself into place here, which is great. We're going to try and keep it moving along because there's already some wonderful questions coming in. So Paula, I can see your slides. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you Mississauga's cultural heritage landscape story. I'm going to begin by giving you an overview of our 2005 inventory, let you know where we're at now, and give you a little case study about a property in Arundel Village. Mississauga implemented a cultural landscape inventory way back in 2005, and we believe we were the first municipality in the province to do so. And like all new technology, our inventory was a little bit big and clunky. We had about 60 landscapes, all kinds of landscapes, the Credit River Valley, historic settlements, estates, gardens, parks, farms, industrial sites, views, vistas, transportation routes, dry lakes, stone walls, campuses, the airport. We had all kinds of landscapes that we added to our heritage inventory. And later on in 2005, the Heritage Act was amended and the Heritage Register provision was added to the Heritage Act. So we did move all of our heritage inventory over to the Heritage Register. So we ended up with a whopping 3,300 properties on our Heritage Register. And just to give you some perspective, in 2016, I was doing some benchmarking and the City of Toronto had 2,500 at the time and we had 3,300. Now, due to applicable law, we were reviewing all of the building permit applications, also all the development applications. The whole idea behind adding the properties to the inventory was so that when there was a development application that came in, we could mitigate any impacts to the proposal through our commenting process. So we were reviewing all kinds of planning applications, committee of adjustment applications, answering questions about what does it mean to be on the Heritage Register from property owners, residents, real estate agents, dealing with tire kickers, asking what they're going to do with these properties. So it was quite a large body of work. As Michelle mentioned the word burden, so it's was a lot of work. And then furthermore, in 2006, the Heritage Act had another change to it. There was the provision added for demolition control for Heritage Register properties. So this doubled our workload of heritage permit applications for the year. We had about half of them would be demolition proposals for properties that were on these landscapes. So as mentioned, it created a high volume of work. And the whole point of that demolition control that was added in Section 27 of the Heritage Act was to provide the opportunity for council to consider heritage designation. But we had very few recommendations for designation from these cultural landscape properties. And, you know, we did try to mitigate some of the proposals that were not as sympathetic, and the heritage consultants that were working for the property owners also tried to mitigate proposals. But there was frustration that the advice couldn't be enforced. Really, we were relying on arm twisting and the goodwill of these developers and property owners. We did document a lot of resources that were subsequently lost. But at the end of the day, I realized that what we really needed were enforceable bylaws if we want to conserve the character of these landscapes. In 2018, we finally received funding to deal with this situation, and we hired ASI to review our inventory and process. So I really wanted them to look at the tools. What are the tools we can use to conserve the character? And my previous panelists already mentioned some of the other tools that can be used. And so some of the tools they came up with are on this slide, and they're all you know, tools that anyone in the planning field would be familiar with, but they can be used together strategically. A suite of tools for each landscape would be unique to conserve the to conserve the character of these landscapes. So this is what we're doing right now. We're looking at what tools are most appropriate to conserve the character of the landscapes. And you've already seen the region of Waterloo's criteria for determining what's a significant landscape, and we've adopted this as well. So all of the landscapes that we are going to moving forward with have to have cultural heritage value or interest, historical integrity, and community value. We did divide our project into two phases. The first phase, what we dealt with are large neighborhood and transportation route landscapes that were creating a lot of non-value added work. And so we have completed phase 1, and we have removed Trelawney, Sheridan Research Park, Credit View Road Scenic Route, as well as Malton's wartime housing from the register. They did not meet the criteria that I just showed you on the last slide. So now we are in phase 2, and we are looking at the rest of the landscapes, the rest of those 60, and we are also looking at potential new landscapes, although we are being you know, very cautious about adding new landscapes. Now I'm going to give you a little quick case study about a property in Arundel Village. So Arundel Village was one of the landscapes that was identified back in 2005. And this is the description and one of the images that was included in that inventory. I did have spaced it a little bit, so it's a bit more readable, but it notes the mature trees and common scale of structures, and the fact that the trees are preserved. By the way, the roads and houses were sited around the trees. And the description also notes the street pattern and scattered heritage properties. So this slide shows the landscape, and it's primarily situated on the south side of Dundas, east of the Credit River. And I'm going to focus in on the first buildable lot at the west end of the village. So this is 1646 Dundas Street West. It's currently occupied by a building with a restaurant and offices that sits quite far back on the lot with a parking lot in the front. And the new owner wants to put up this 8-story condo building with commercial on the ground floor. And it happens to be located adjacent to Arundel Village Hall, which is designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So this rendering was provided by the developer, and perhaps you know, it's quite out of scale, which is interesting, but it gives you a sense of what the proposal is. And the whole community was against this proposal. These signs that say reject EV Royale were on practically everyone's front lawn in the community. I bet you if you go back there today, you'll still see some of them. There's still a lot of angst about this proposal. And the heritage aspects haven't been completely worked out, but our city planning staff did recommend approval of this proposal, but council refused the proposal. And we did have concerns. We do have concerns with the proposal, but we were excited to see we had the heritage consultant representing the city was David Kooming, and he put together a stellar opposition witness statement against this proposal. So we were interested to see, of course, what the decision was. And it's probably not a big surprise when it goes to LPAT that LPAT said that it was compatible. And that compatible essentially means development, which may not necessarily be the same as or similar to the existing and desired development, but nonetheless enhances an established community and coexists with existing development without unacceptable adverse impact on the surrounding area. So we wanted to let you know what's happening with cultural landscapes at LPAT. You know, would one of those other tools have helped? Perhaps a heritage conservation district might have been helpful in you know, reining in that development. We don't know. You know, I think the vast majority of people do want to follow the rules, and as long as they're clear. So I would encourage everybody to continue, you know, recognizing cultural landscapes despite decisions like this. And I wanted to end off on a more positive note. Our consultant has found this really cool road, Dixon Park Crescent. It's just west of Gordon Woods. It has this cool mid-20th century vibe to it. It's about 40 houses, and it is a potential new landscape we're looking at. So check out our website for more information on what we're up to, and later on check it out and see if this landscape made the cut. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula, for sharing some successes and some struggles and challenges. Managing, you know, cultural heritage landscapes in a changing kind of climate is always tricky. And so, yes, you know, having all those tools at our disposal sometimes don't always work out the way that we had thought. And you try and manage the change moving forward as best as possible. So. Okay, there's lots of great questions coming in. And so I'll just have our panelists, yep, there they are, come back to the screen here. And so I'm gonna maybe merge a few of these questions together because I think they blend nicely. So Jennifer kind of asked a question, and I had one as well. That was, we know that, you know, heritage impact assessments are often a tool that are used by municipalities to help understand how a potential new development or site alteration or change of zoning or things in that nature might impact the overall property. And so the question is, can you provide an example where an identified cultural heritage landscape was considered in a heritage impact assessment or within the planning process, and the impacts and mitigation measures that resulted? So I will just see who would like to take that one on.
I can start.
Okay, Michelle, thank you.
My answer will be fairly short because I mentioned in my presentation that we are undergoing a review of our official plan, and that we're going to be bringing in policies that allow us to ask for heritage impact assessments for cultural heritage landscapes. And the reason why we're doing this, I mean, there's pros and cons to this approach. One is that we've incrementally lost a lot of heritage features of some of these larger landscapes without having been able to ask for a heritage impact assessment. But the positive is that when we finally are able to ask for a heritage impact assessment as per the policies in our OP, we'll have a better understanding of what we're looking for and what impact is too great. because heritage impact assessments we're finding isn't a great tool to deal with small scale incremental change, because it's really hard to demonstrate that the loss of one heritage feature in a big sea of heritage features is going to irreparably damage the heritage value of the landscape. But if you see that again and again and again, it does obviously have a cumulative effect. So that would be our responses. We haven't done it yet. We fully intend to, but we're trying to make best use of the heritage impact assessment tool by making sure we have nice, clear criteria.
So maybe Paula, I could follow up with you on this one, because I know that the city of Mississauga has cultural heritage landscape specific terms of reference for heritage impact assessment. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, how that looks maybe a little bit different and what it might seek to capture in those things.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we did develop that specific terms of reference really mainly because we had a lot of redevelopment going on, and it kind of came out of complaints about having to do a full heritage impact assessment. So it was really more of a scoped down version. Although we do reserve the right to ask for a full heritage impact assessment if we do feel that there is, individual cultural heritage merit in that property. So, but to answer the question, I think, as Michelle said, it is a challenge. We're dealing with these huge huge landscapes, and then these individual properties. And I mean, I think there have been some mitigation with on a consultant owner basis, where we are able to, maybe save a few more trees or bring the height down a little bit to make it fit in with the character a little better. But it's all just these really small changes that often happen at that level. And then if we as staff have concerns with those types of things, we will push back. And especially when we're sort of starting off in an area where it's been very stable and there is a new development that's quite out of character, then we definitely will push back and use that tool to try to mitigate the impact. But like I said, a lot of it is arm twisting, and we need those bylaws in place if we really want to make a difference.
Thank you. Victoria, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I will just say as well that we have also not implemented cultural heritage landscape specific policies yet, but we do identify to property owners that are submitting development applications when their property is located within an identified cultural heritage landscape, just so that they are aware of the identification of the area and some of the characteristics that have been identified for those landscapes. And we generally do direct property owners to take visual cues from the surrounding environs when proposing a new development within these landscape areas. So whether it's looking at existing materials or architectural features within the cultural heritage landscape, we do try to have property owners and developers attempt to incorporate compatible development within our identified landscapes.
Yeah, and I think as an extension of that, I know that the region of Waterloo has this heritage toolbox, and one of them is, understanding about infill and compatibility in historic neighborhoods. And so very detailed approach and outlines, all these different cues about massing, scale, height, setback, those types of things to understand how you can do infill or additions in a conscious way of taking those neighborhood cues into account. Okay, so the next question, again, I'm going to merge a few questions that we have together. And I know Michelle answered one, but I'll ask maybe the other two. And Michelle wants to. The question was, how much consideration or consultation regarding Indigenous cultural heritage landscapes was done? If not done, maybe how could we add this perspective after? And then either as an extension of that, was it successful? Or what I'll say, are there any lessons learned at this point for any municipalities or heritage planning staff who are thinking of undertaking this initiative to understand right from kind of day one?
Sure, I can start off with that. So we are conducting Indigenous engagement with our current project, and there has been a lot of interest from the Mississaugas of the new credit in the Credit River, and especially the Mississauga Golf and Country Club. So we are continuing that dialogue, and I don't really have any results yet to report, but we are undertaking that engagement, and it's very valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, and from the City of Kitchener, we have not established a separate Indigenous engagement process as part of our cultural heritage landscape implementation work. But after listening to the presentations today and to my heritage colleagues as well, I think there's certainly opportunity for us to explore this further as we continue our implementation work for the cultural heritage landscapes across the city.
Thanks, Victoria. Maybe Michelle, you can elaborate on the answer you put in the question chat.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we did engage, and I would say I think what would be most valuable to the listeners is how did it work and what were the lessons learned. I think it's almost like it was 100 years too late and about 15 years too early. So what I mean by that is that there is limited trust between the City of Waterloo and the various folks that we engaged with. And starting with a project right at the outset, as opposed to building trust and then moving into a project, proved to be very challenging. And I went in very naively thinking we were going to have this fantastic conversation. And in fact, it was pretty challenging. And I would say that it was really one in about 100 steps that we need to take to resolve some of the lost trust that has occurred over the last couple hundred years. So, you know, it was definitely worth doing. We got, you know, various levels of feedback from the different groups that we reached out to. I think what was most valuable is pointing out to us some of the flaws in our approach and how we can do it better next time around. And so definitely we are mindful of trying to make improvements on that. And when we go forward with some of the more technical studies and plans that involve some of the areas that have been flagged of interest by Indigenous communities, we'll be trying again and reaching out. And it could also be that when we get to that more concrete level of what are we actually talking about, as opposed to just talking about an inventory, which really has limited impact. Maybe we will have more fruitful conversations. I'm hopeful that we will.
Thank you. Well, may I suggest, as some of our comments have also suggested, to take, you know, Carolyn King's note on this Moccasin Identifier initiative. I believe she settled on that word, and integrating that in as a wonderful first step to just integrate those kind of tangible ways in to bring those stories and those discussions into the process. So just a general question here from Adrian. Are residents in favor of having their neighborhoods or streets designated as CHLs or not? What type of feedback have you got from the public when starting these kind of initiatives and inventories?
I can start answering that question. So I think largely within the City of Kitchener, the identification of cultural heritage landscapes, particularly for neighborhoods, has been generally well received. I think the residents of these areas are excited about the prospect of identifying the specific attributes and characteristics that make their neighborhoods special and unique, and exploring opportunities for how these features can be maintained. I think one of the concerns that we do hear from property owners is, well, what does this mean for my property specifically? And so we've had conversations with property owners through our public engagement sessions, just to discuss the larger protection of the areas, and recognizing that there may not be specific impacts to their property specifically, but it's more so just looking at areas collectively as a whole and just maintaining character that's been established.
Yeah. Paula, did you want to add something?
Well, I'll just say it's a mixed bag, right? It depends on the community and the people there and what, if they're feeling under threat or if they want to expand their houses or sell their properties. It's really all over the map. And I would just strongly encourage anyone embarking on a new project to make sure you've got a good buy-in from the community, because if you don't have that, it's very, very challenging.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. I'm sorry, Michelle, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to echo the comments of Victoria and Paula and just add that, yeah, we had a mixed bag. We had some real strong advocates and then some who were very opposed, and then everything in between. The tool that we found the most useful was that wiggly line that showed the full range of options. Everybody is so afraid of the D word being designation and make assumptions as to what that means. Even though a designation can mean very different things for different properties. And so by showing people that there was a full range that we were considering of options, and that was going to be determined through future study with engagement with, in the community, we were able to, I think, alleviate some of the fears. And there will always be those that are just not supportive of it. And that's, we had to let those ones go.
Yes, I often, when people ask me what I do, I often say a good chunk of my job is telling people what we don't do, what it's not about, and clearing up some of those misconceptions about how these kind of processes play out and things along that nature. So always an opportunity when starting these types of processes to make sure that everybody understands what this is not implying or not going to do, and that the community has, a conversation in how this plays out. Okay, I think I have time for one more question. I'll just say, how would you like to see cultural heritage landscapes used to inform environmental assessments? A big one to end on, yes. Go ahead, Paula.
Well, I just think I'm not an expert on environmental assessments, but it seems like it takes a best practice approach. So I think that's the right way to go, and keep doing what you're doing. And, but then if you are using that same report to apply to alter a property, then we have to get back to the rules and address that as well. But I think what's happening with environmental assessments is great, because it takes a very holistic approach, which is what cultural landscapes are all about.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think, the assessment of landscapes should be incorporated into the assessment reports that are already required as part of the EA process. I think it is reasonable to assume that cultural heritage landscapes, particularly like urban roadscapes, will change over time. So I think it's important to acknowledge the collective understanding of a place or a space and ensure that if changes do occur, that it's done in a manner that is appropriately guided, so that the integrity of a landscape remains over time.
Thanks, Victoria. I think that's a great way to end it, is understanding that these spaces need consideration. They need to be looked at individually for what is of value, and understand how you manage that change moving forward. So we'll ask our panelists. There are a few extra questions in there that are maybe person specific. So I'll see if you would like to address those. And I will pass it over, I believe, to Kayla to do our closing remarks. But thank you all so much. I really appreciated the insight you provided on how particular municipality has gone about this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you to our panelists and Amy for moderating that great discussion. I think we were all wondering how a panel discussion was going to play out on a virtual event, but I think it worked really well. So thank you, everyone. We wanted to thank all of the speakers. This has been obviously a pivot for us. We normally do this as an in-person event, and all of the speakers were lined up to talk last year at this event, and we've now moved to virtual. So we wanted to thank you on agreeing to the move and being patient with us as we figured out all of the logistics behind moving this event. I also wanted to thank our committee who has guided this change to a virtual event for learning new things and figuring out all the logistics and how the various pieces work together. I think it's gone off really well, and I know everyone's had a lot of effort and stresses about it, but I think it's great. And we also wanted to thank all of you for joining us. As I said, we love seeing you in person, but we are very excited that we still got to have these conversations online. We will be sending out a survey at the end of this week. So we'd love to hear your feedback on this event in particular, as well as this particular format. So we look forward to hearing your feedback later this week. And if you do have any questions for any of the panelists or for any of the staff at ARA, please feel free to reach out. And that is all I have to say. Again, thank you very much for coming.